Welcome to fabulous Lake Tahoe, your local's guide to the very best of America's year-round playground. I'm Jack Durst, and I'm here at the Mont Bleu Casino Resort for the 2014 Elevate Your View Lake Tahoe Leadership Summit. This is the third video in a three-part set. If you want to see all three videos, click on the annotation on your screen right now to be taken to a playlist of all three videos. The Dave Meslin video in particular is really cool. This video features Dana Williams, who used to be the mayor of Park City, Utah, a community which had a lot of the same challenges that Lake Tahoe has and has addressed them. Check it out.
Welcome back, everybody. So we're finished up with breakouts, and I hope you found them to be enlightening. We're going to finish today with a great and insightful keynote from Dana Williams. For the summit, we wanted keynote speakers from outside of our region to come in and share their experiences and knowledge with us, and Dana Williams fits this mold perfectly.
Well, thanks.
Dana served as the mayor of Park City, Utah for 3 terms. He started in 2001 and he finished up last December. For 12 years, he shepherded the Park City community to one of international acclaim, working with developers on smart growth projects, promoting housing for the working and middle class, and all the while keeping the spirit of Park City intact, keeping Park City, Park City. Dana Williams rose to his position as mayor of Park City during a time of conflict in the community. Conflict resulting from the scope and size of development in and around Park City and the community's own vision for their town. But instead of being a wedge candidate and picking sides, Dana championed cooperation and collaboration. He brought differing voices of the community together to help shape policy and vision for Park City so everyone could provide input on how they wanted their town to look, to feel, and grow. We chose Dana because of these attributes, just as we chose our previous keynote speaker, Dave Meslin. Both Dave and Dana believe in an inclusive decision-making process where we all have a say in how we want our communities to be. I hope you find this style engaging and relevant. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dana Williams.
So there's a couple of things. I want to give 2 shout-outs. Is Angela still here? So can we congratulate the only elected official that took the time to show up? She's running for county supervisor, so vote. And the second one is Captain Steve. So I got to town yesterday, and Daniel gave me a tour of the area, and then we met Steve and went out on a boat, and I learned everything from Pleistocene to now about this area in terms of what's happened. And it's one of the things that I became, and still extremely proud of Park City, is that the people that live there are the ambassadors, and the people that run businesses, and the people that drive the buses and clean condos and wait on you are the first line in terms of dealing with the people who come to visit you. And there's a direct correlation between their ability and desire to come back on how they're treated while they're there. And one of the most common comments that I got, the last 3 years I've been a barista trying to augment my sucky public income. And people would say, what is it about your town? You all have the same smirk. And after I tell them what drugs we put in the local water system, then I tell them we're all kind of bought into the same thing. And last week there was a little article that was written about this conference, and when I read it, someone sent it to me and I read it, and I was actually kind of pissed by it because it was, oh, Park City does this so well. But it's not that we do anything better, it's just that time created maybe some things earlier for us than they are you. And so I don't think we're better or anything like that. You'll not hear or see anything that I say that has to do with that. But the 90s in our town, we were deeply divided. And it was the haves and have-nots, and it was the working and middle class people who were feeling like we're being slowly but surely shut out of this community. So in 1992, there was a development that was proposed in Park City, which was in an area called Daly Canyon. And if you go up Main Street and keep walking, you go right into Daly Canyon. And almost our whole mountain range, we have no BLM, Forest Service, or state parks in our area. 100% of the land is privately owned. Mountain ranges were owned by the mining company. So the mining company comes in with a development that was going to be 28 pods of development on 1,500 acres and gated. And this was the most common hiking and biking area in our town. So a group of us got together and said, okay, we need to organize, and how are we going to be effective? And what we decided was, we called this group the Citizens Allied for Responsible Growth, or CARG. The development community referred to us as CAVE, the Citizens Against Virtually Everything. And then the president of the mining company referred to us as the Great Unwashed of Park City. And what we decided was, let's learn the land management code and the general plan better than the people who are in government. And let's get some CAD designers so that when we do presentations, we show renderings of what this will look like when it's done. At that time, and I think you guys, and I don't know if you guys do it, but we had 3-minute rules. We'd go to a council meeting and they say, okay, you have 180 seconds, go. And then you were stopped, regardless of what you were saying, even if it was a message from God, and she was telling you something that your community was going to absolutely love. You only had 180 seconds to do it. So we would put 10 people in a row. And every 3 minutes we would hand off so that we would get a good 30-minute presentation in. The day I took office, I got rid of the 3-minute rule. And what we did was, and people, the staff and my council were like, oh my God, we're going to be here all night. And I said, watch what happens when a leader actually leads. So if someone starts repeating yourself, I'm sorry, could you summarize because you're starting to repeat. If someone starts out and they're uncivil, you people are a bunch of, you're done. Sorry, we don't have to take this. So anyway, this group in the 90s changed 58 planning and zoning laws in the city and county. The biggest single one had to do with any time that there is a development, you are required to do a public hearing before you apply. Just take a map and a pencil and show us how many units, what you want to do, and have a public hearing and take input before you spend $2 million on rendering and process and everything else to try to get an approval done. The other big thing we had was, typically in terms of developments, we would go 6 months, a year before the public was allowed input. And we started saying every meeting associated with a project has to have community input on that meeting. And so that actually became part of the code. So needless to say, and several people have asked, okay, so what finally got you to run for office? Well, I got pissed. And so basically what was happening was more and more areas in the mountain range around us. Oh, let me tell you about that project. It was called the Flagstaff Project. It took 10 years to get through planning and zoning. 400 citizens were showing up at city council meetings. It was awesome. So by the time it was done, they got 3 pods of development, which encompassed 150 acres, no gated community, and 1,350 acres got put into a conservation easement and protected with a trail system. So we were just so empowered by the fact that, wait a minute, citizens did this. It wasn't elected officials, it was the public who actually took the time to show up. And needless to say, city council meetings are probably one of the most boring things because it's lot line adjustments, it's all these things. But every now and then, it's something that is a big deal and worthwhile to show up. And I know that public speaking is the second greatest fear after snakes that I think that people have, because it's tough to do. And it's great going to meetings and you see people that walk in and they've had a couple of belts to take the edge off, and they're kind of like, I gotta tell you, And so, anyway, one of the things that we did was we actually started training the staffs in government on how to speak in public. And so you have an engineer, and especially in our, we have a lot of engineers on staff, and when they do public meetings and the public talks, he's an engineer, and someone says something and he goes, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard because it doesn't work. So we stopped having the engineers do public hearings because you need to be amenable to the public. How many high school kids are in here? God love you. Awesome, these guys deserve it. So last week there was a little story about this event, and there was a comment, about the way we've done things. And we've been at this for the last 25 years. So we've been through the times where we were really fighting as a community. And when I decided to run for office, we had a mayor in Salt Lake named Rocky Anderson. And Rocky was our citizens group's attorney. And he was absolutely great. And we're having Thanksgiving dinner and we're drinking wine. He said, so why don't you take on the big boys? And I said, you know, I owned a bar. I was a soil scientist. I was an alfalfa grower and all these things I would never win. And he goes, but what's the worst thing that can happen? You lose. So, but you're going to learn something from losing. So step up. And so first bottle of wine, I wasn't there. The third bottle of wine, I was absolutely ready to go. So in January of 2001, if anyone had ever said, would you ever run for office? I would say, no, I love being a citizen. And it's awesome as a citizen because you don't have to compromise. You don't have to back down. And once you're in, it's a different world. And you learn pretty quickly that, my God, I got 10% of what I wanted. And sometimes that's a huge victory because you move the rock a little bit. So I want to encourage those of you that don't actually get up and participate, that it does make a difference. It is worth it. You won't always win. We got so good at being so very celebratory over exceedingly minor victories because we lost almost all the time. So needless to say, in 2001, I announced I was going to run. The gentleman that signed up after me, I had worked on his campaign to get him elected to city council. So I'm running against my friend. And I've run 3 times. I've never mentioned the opponent in an election, ever. Because I'm not running against them. I'm running for something. And so, oh, please tell me why you're better than him. I'm not sure that I am. So I'm not going to answer that question. And it's hard when the press kind of thinks they run your life and you don't play ball. And so, but what you're able to do is stick to what it is that your value, the reason you're there, the reason you're running. So Park City was a ghost town on the National Registry of Ghost Towns until 1980. So in 1963, when my parents bought their first place there was 700 people and 680 of them were drunk. And my dad called my mother in West LA and said, I just bought this place for $400 in a little town, and I think something's going to happen here, so throw the kids in the van and get up there. We thought it was the most god-awful redneck place that we'd ever seen. And yet things started to happen. So 1963, the mining company got a grant from President Kennedy to put some ski runs in because the silver had started to run out. We have about 1,600 miles of tunnels under our city, and we've had a few interesting sinkholes in the last 5 years that are 1,500 feet straight down. But and the mining company owned all of the land. So what we realized, I took office 2 weeks before the opening ceremonies of the 2002 Olympics. So my first interview was with Matt Lauer and Katie Couric. And it was like, you play in a band and you're this, and so what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to change the world. And I spoke to a high school group a few months ago, and there was a young gal that was 18 that she had just graduated, and she said, it's so awesome that I'm 18 and I still think I can change the world. And then I got up and it's so awesome that I'm 58 and still think I can change the world. And so we're on the same boat here. But anyway, so we'll kind of get into this discussion. A little bit about, this is Main Street up here, and a bunch of this area, actually aside from the dirt road, looks exactly the same as it does. We have a downtown historic district that has miner shacks that in the 60s, 10 of us could push them over. And now they are all protected with severe guidelines as to what you can do, what you can't do, and it's the historic district. It's become a major source of tourism. People do walking tours, and there's little plaques on houses that tell the history. This was the first surgeon that lived here, or whatever. And this is what the guys look like. I've been down in these mines several times, and we have maybe a half a dozen miners left in Park City. But and then this area up here was called Ecker Hill. And in World War II, this is where the 10th Mountain Brigade trained before they went to Europe and fought in snow country. And they learned how to jump on this, and the framework is actually still there. So, who is Park City? Park City is a town of about 8,300 year-round residents. We're surrounded by about 22,000 people in the unincorporated area. When you get off the highway to come into Park City, it looks like every other highway in America. It's big box commercial, it's Walmarts, it's strip malls. We don't allow any of that. We have a couple of big boxes that are the markets, and I think a Rite Aid in town. And other than that, we have like the cutest Burger King you've ever seen. Although I noticed actually your McDonald's architecture looks pretty nice here. And so, anyway, as the ski industry progressed, we started realizing, especially right after the Olympics, that, okay, we've just put on probably one of the world's biggest events. And Park City, how many of you actually remember, watched the 2002 games? They were awesome, no two ways about it. Utah as a whole did a good job. We came together as a state, and needless to say, and I'll talk about it a little more in terms of Park City's not necessarily the most beloved city by the rest of the state of Utah. But that was a situation where everybody came together. Park City was definitely the alpine heart of those games. And plus it's where people came to party because they weren't going to go to Salt Lake City for that. So we realized right after the games, all right, we've held this thing, we've had this event, we have huge growth pressure here, lots of people coming in saying, well, I know you have planning and zoning, but here's why we don't have to live up to it. And we'll sue you into submission. That didn't go over so well. So what we decided was, my first meeting with all the city manager and the department heads after the Olympics was, I have this idea of becoming a sustainable community. And I have this idea that people will visit us because of environmental things that we do, and because of carbon footprinting, and because they come in and they see solar projects. And let's take City Hall off the natural gas grid and use ground source heat pumps. And all these department heads and the city manager said, why don't you go play with your little hippie friends and we'll run the city? I was pissed. So needless to say, I said, I've read the brochure, I'm your boss, and this isn't going to work. And I'm in my brand new office, there's nothing there yet. And I look down, and there's a Grateful Dead mouse pad on my desk. And I look at the staff, and this one guy winked at me. He became the city manager. And we fired all the department heads. And the city manager is now the city manager of West Sacramento City, a beautiful resort community. So needless to say, what we realized was we had to rework the government from the ground up. And the number one thing was open and responsiveness. And the fact that for every one of those department heads that were fired, we hired 3 mid-level managers that specialized in everything from housing to environmental issues, sustainability, and we actually, and I'll show you in a minute, we actually created a Department of Sustainability in the government. And we realized that there's 3 functions that we deal with: our community, our environment, and community, environment, and something else. And I'll show you the slide. And so everything we do is based on these 3 things. So let's actually do this, and let's invite the public to participate in it. So we decided let's do visioning. In every community, most communities do visioning. And I think I've been to 7 of them in the last 35 years. Same 50 people that come and argue about the same things. And so when we put out an RFP to get somebody to facilitate this meeting, there was a guy from Alexandria, Virginia, that wrote back and said, if you want to do a visioning, I will do that, but there will be casualties. So we called him immediately and said, okay, this is awesome. And we said, what do you mean? And he said, you're trying to accomplish something, and you cannot be sidetracked by the war stories of every single person in your community. So what we did was we asked people, we used Twitter, we used Facebook, and we asked everybody 7 questions. And basically, we wouldn't allow anybody to do anything except answer those questions. Why are you here? What brought you here? What keeps you here? What are you proud of? What are you disappointed in? What would make you leave? And then we took those things and we actually wrote them out. What does that mean? So, and so how do you see us? And these were basically, one thing I hate is PowerPoint karaoke, so I'm not going to read you these. I'll let you read them. But basically, this was how the community saw themselves. How do you feel about your town? And one of the things government is not really good at is finding out how people feel. That doesn't tend to be the role of government. So here's the things they came back with. And we said, okay, that's great. We'll write that down. What are we concerned about? So then we took those things and we started the rewrite of the general plan based on what the people who live in our town told us they wanted. One of the first things I learned in government, I think it was within the first 12 hours, was this is not about me. This is about how well I represent the people that put me here. And so it's not about my vision, it's about the communities. And I never forgot that for a second in 12 years of being in office. So then we started looking at, let's go out, let's talk about our successes, and then let's go tell the world what it is we do. We just signed a contract with Sundance before I left to 2026. This festival is absolutely awesome. There's 800 residents that volunteer for the festival. There's about 2,500 total volunteers in that film festival. It drops $68 million into Utah's economy in 16 days. And the people that are a little upset about, oh, I can't go to this restaurant, is like, deal with it, kids. When we were doing this, our facilitator came back and he said, those of you who've been there, we only have 2 entrances into our city. And so basically he said, your biggest issue of your residents is traffic. This is 3 years ago. We're in the middle of a recession. And he goes, I don't know how you're going to spin this. And I went, 1, I don't spin things. 2, thank God we have traffic. Thank God we have people coming here on a town who is based on other people's disposable income. And they're still coming even in a downward national economy. So I felt like we were very fortunate. This building whoops. I knew I'd blow this. This building right here is an old WPA schoolhouse, of which we have 3. This is City Hall, and we'll talk about City Hall a little bit. But it kind of sits up on a hill, overlooks Main Street. But about 40% of our town is right there. So that's one of the things in terms of, we have some major differences, even though we're both resort towns. Geographically, you are so much bigger than us. And so your issues tend to be bigger. Our 3 resorts. So Park City was the first resort in 1963. The Canyons was the second resort, which was originally called Park West. And then Deer Valley started in 1980. Deer Valley has been rated the top ski resort in America 4 out of the last 5 years. And I don't think that's because they don't allow people like me who are snowboarders to go there, but it might be. Part of the thing is actually, and I love the public-private conversation, we have 125 nonprofits in our city. We take 1% of our budget every year, which is about $600,000 to $700,000, and we grant it to the nonprofits. And what we do, and we take care of the ones that work with the people in the most need in our town first. So the Peace House, which is a domestic violence shelter, they are always funded. They never have to worry about it. The People's Health Center, that deals with the 40% of our community that has no health insurance, will do everything right up to delivering a child for nothing. And part of it is acknowledging that our socioeconomic diversity is the strongest thing we have. We love our sense of place, but we stay there because of the people that make it up. So, snow isn't the only game anymore. Isn't that a great shot? So basically, and someone was telling me here, and I think it's worthwhile of a community dialogue, in these various areas around Park City, some areas are allowed to have nightly rentals, and other areas are not allowed to have any. What that's done has made very strong neighborhoods. And I think, as I said, I said it earlier, in the writing of the general plan, we allowed the neighborhoods to write their own chapters. This is your neighborhood, you tell us. And again, our job is to be responsive to you, not to tell you what to do. So, as I said in the tourism section, in 2002, 80% of our business happened in 100 days in the winter. Not a sustainable business plan. Main Street would close for up to 2 months. People would just go out of business. So it created even bigger transient workforce because people would go somewhere else for the summer. Excuse me. So the first thing we did was right there, and when we got this tournament, my 14-year-old at the time, who's 26 now, thought that I was awesome because we brought 1,500 15-year-old girls to town every summer for the Western Championships Fast Pitch World Series. That automatically booked us at 80-some-odd% occupancy in the summer, in July. So, and then this is an ongoing event called the Arts Festival, right there. 3 days, brings in about 180,000 people over the 3 days. And we do it every year. And now we have something on every Sunday. We block off half of the main street, and we have what's called the Silly Market. And it is pretty funky, no two ways about it. But there's bands, there's stilt walkers, there's booths, there's local crafts, and food. And basically, this Main Street area here, in 2002, when we had a group come in and talk to us about who should we be, they came in and said, well, we love your town, but you have the most myopic business district. Is there a business association for just the historic district? No. Well, they should form one. And they should start doing things together and not worry about just what's in front of their front door. So that group is now about 9 years old. They put on about 20-some-odd events a year, including things like a dog parade. Are dogs as critical here as they are where we are? Yeah. Do you have leash laws that nobody does anything about? Yeah, okay.
Except for the coyotes.
Coyotes. We don't have coyote problems. We have moose problems downtown. And then one of the things, and a gentleman was talking to me about this, a few years ago we became the home base for the Tour of Utah, international bike race that goes out all through our county, through the next county, and then ends right on our main street. That brings about 12,000 people to town for 2 to 3 days. So what we started realizing was, if we actually start inviting people to come here and do the things we like to do, we'll make money on this. And it works. It absolutely works. This is just an indicator. I think I mentioned a minute ago, we have no government land around us. So starting in 1999, we passed our first open space bond for $10 million. When I took office, we had about 2,000 acres of protected open space and 50 miles of trails. When I left office in January, we had 10,000 acres protected, about 7,000 of it under conservation easements, and about 3,000 of it in permanent deed restrictions. And our trail system went from 50 miles to 400. And we'll talk about that more in a minute in terms of economic drivers. Environment, community, economy. That was the third one. So basically we came up with this real dummied down chart so I could understand it. But here's everything we are. So it was kind of like define who we are and then tell the world who we are and ask everybody who lives in town to participate in this. And so in the sustainability department, these are the various people who are working on those various things. And we'll get into some of the particulars on this in a minute. But EPA, 25 years ago, I was a citizen involved in the EPA committee. Park City had 5 Superfund sites within the city limits. And they're now called CERCLAS, which is the new acronym. But we had 5 Superfund sites. From 1983, when they were identified, to 2002, when I took office, we hadn't cleaned up any of them. The neighborhood that I live on was built on 35 feet of mine tailings. And so it was up to every individual homeowner on your own to figure out what to do, and the city wasn't helping at all. So I went to the city manager and I said, why don't we give anyone who comes into compliance $500? Which is the equivalent of 2 dump trucks of topsoil, which is what we had to do, is we had to cap these soils. And they were like, yeah, well, that doesn't mean anything. And I would watch what happens when you actually show that you care about what's happening. 78 houses in the first year came into compliance. So all 5 Superfund sites have now been archived. They're all cleaned up. And it was one of these things about, let's look at, the chamber is coming to us saying, more and more people are looking at the environmental policies of the places that they're spending their disposable income. We've got to clean up our environment here because we have major issues. So we cleaned it up, and it certainly has helped. and I'm not there yet, but I'm within a couple of years. We had no seniors housing. And so typically what we would see is people would hit a certain age and they would leave. Because one, there was no place for them to live, there was no housing projects for them. The properties that they'd grown up in that had stairs and lawns and things that they didn't want to take care of, it was easier for them to just sell and leave. And so we actually, it's happening right now, but our first seniors housing project is being done right in the same project with a young family housing project. And there's communal areas here where the seniors provide the daycare for the younger families, and the younger families do some of the work for the seniors that they need, run them to the market or things like that. That's awesome. We also just approved our first co-housing project, which is 11 units that people have bought in. 7 of the units are under affordable housing criteria, and there are common areas that these 11 owners will actually, several times a month, use their common areas to eat together, to sit around and talk to each other. It's a great idea. Renewable energy, we'll get into this a little bit more. I said, are you going to put who actually came up with this quote? And they said no, so I did. But anyway, we just got back, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but last year, China held its first international eco-civilization conference. And the government was the audience. The Politburo, state government, and city governments were the audience. And 4 cities in America were invited to present, and Park City was one of them. It was awesome. I mean, I gave the biggest, ni hao, what's up? And, but to talk to them, and part of my talk was how we've increased tourism through not building. And there is a direct correlation between the mountain bike trails that we've put in around our city. We don't even take care of them. We have a nonprofit called the Mount Trails Foundation that we help fund, that they maintain the trail system. And so now we're having problems of, they're getting used too much. Well, great, deal with it. So this was that conference, and you can see we were talking about protected open space. So we had 3 topics that we were to speak about in China. And one was this economic driver of preserving land to increase tourism. The third was on the ground, what are you doing in terms of reducing carbon? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, because I think that is one of the single biggest things that's facing all of us. And I think resort communities are ground zero for this. So we need to be a voice, both locally and nationally, on what's happening in terms of climate change. I feel so fortunate to live in a state that 3 years ago passed a resolution that Utahns do not believe in climate change. Awesome, great, thanks guys. And then this year they put $5 million into a fund to sue the federal government to take over the national parks for oil and gas leases. We make more money on tourism than we do on extractive industry, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. So then the third panel had to do with government's responsibility in terms of environmental issues. And it was kind of awesome because the panel was one of the Politburo members from Cuba, was a former head of the EU, was the mayor of Hangzhou, China, and me. And it was like, hi, I'm in Park City. But what was so cool about it was all of these folks were talking about it's up to government top down to do this. And I got up, and that was not the basis of my discussion, and I said, please do not send me to Mongolia for what I'm about to say. I am not trying to be disrespectful to the Chinese government, but I don't believe in top-down government at all. It is up to citizens to participate and become part of the system and be in government and change the world that way. So it needs to be from the bottom up, not the top down. Because too many times the top forgets where it is they came from. And we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. So open space, again, we're facing something that you guys, what a luxury, I guess, for the most part, to have so much federal and state protected land around you. So we had none. So 3 bonds over from 1999 to 2007. The smallest approval rating by the voters was 76% to tax themselves to go out and buy it. And what we've been doing is in development agreements, we are trying to preserve open space through development agreements. So there's extractions in those. There's the give and take of Well, you give us 20% more density, and we'll give you a little bit more open space. Now we're to the point where any project over 5 acres, 60% has to stay open, non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. And if you are generating over a certain amount of square footage, 20% of your project has to be for affordable workforce housing, non-negotiable. And people are like, we're going to sue you, we're still waiting for the first lawsuit. And it's been in effect for almost 10 years. So it works. So we've been able to protect land through the development process, but actually the single greatest way to protect it was to go out and buy it. And the fact that the community would step up and say, we're willing to pay extra taxes. I think on my property tax bill, the total I pay is about $120 a year to now have 10,000 acres that's protected around the city. It's worthwhile. That's 26 lattes. So 7,000 acres are around the city, but then we also have another 3,000 acres that is not adjoining the city, that was protected in our county, that our taxpayers agreed to use their tax money to buy land that wasn't in our city. We got a cool town. I mean, you got to admit, that's actually pretty cool. So, renewable energy. One of the things that we thought was an obligation of government was to set the example, show people latest technologies. And that was one of the things that we did with the sustainability department. I want 20-somethings that are out of college, that are idealistic, that are looking 20 to 30 years ahead, rather than the people who've been there 25 years and say, I don't want to do anything new. I'm afraid of change. I don't want to try it. So one of the first things we did, this is our police building, public safety building. Public safety used to be in City Hall. And about 15 years ago, a guy walked in with a gun who had just shot his wife and walked into City Hall to turn himself in. And we kind of went, okay, we should probably not have the police station in the middle of City Hall. So we built this building. This building is 100% off of the natural gas grid. And we started looking into what's called ground source heat pumps. So basically what we do is we send glycol 250 feet into the ground, into a reservoir with several pipes that come up. At that level, it stays 58 degrees all year. And then we use these small half horsepower pumps to bring them up into these buildings, and they go into the HVAC system. So in the summer, when we need air conditioning, which I'm still not a big fan of air conditioning at 7,000 to 8,000 feet, it's like, really, deal with it. So we bring that in. No greenhouse gases are needed for the air conditioning because there is 58 degrees, there's your air conditioning. So we just put that into the blower. And then in the winter, when we bring that in, it goes into a heat exchanger, kind of like those continuous heat hot water heaters. So we're only warming that liquid from 58 to 68 rather than pulling in air at 10 degrees and trying to raise it to 68 degrees. So this building, which is about 11,000 square feet, is about $280 a month on average through the year to eat and cool. Our old WPA schoolhouse that I'll show you is about $350 a month, and it's 14,000 square feet. And then this is, I love this thing. The EPA is making us, 60% of our water comes from mine shafts. Not the healthiest thing. So we spend a lot of money on water treatment. And the EPA has come and said, all right, you need to run the water from this mine to this mine, and then into a treatment facility coming out of both mines. So I went to the staff and I said, if you look at where that shaft is and where this shaft is, why don't we look at what a turbine would do if we're trying gravity flow into the pipe from the first mine, and let's see what it does by the time it hits the second mine. 128 houses worth of power generated for nothing. So basically, it's kind of like, let's talk about it. Our biggest source of carbon in our city, we thought was going to be the transportation system. And as it turned out, it was pumping water. Uses more energy than a year-round free bus system. And because we're pumping it, in some cases, 2,000 or 3,000 feet up. Well, fine. Every time we bring it down, let's generate power off of it to offset the up. There was a philosopher, when I was in China after my third talk, there was a Chinese professor, this woman got up and she said, you see, I've been to all 3 of your talks, you seem to have a philosophy about the way you're in government. And I said, yes, it's the Tao of duh. And she looks at me and she goes, I'm very familiar with the Tao. I do not know the duh. And I said, the duh is when you slap your head that this is so freaking obvious, why aren't you doing it? You know, and she goes, oh, so it's the philosophy of the obvious. And I went, yes. And she goes, have you studied Confucian philosophy? You know, actually, the 70s were a great time in America. Yes, I have. And so the other thing that we've done, needless to say, we have done our carbon footprinting. We did both the government and the city as a whole. And then started looking at offsets. And the first thing we did was we hired a company called Johnson Controls. And Johnson Controls will come in and do efficiency studies. And we said, all right, we want to find all the low-hanging fruit on carbon reduction in our town. They spent 3 months and came back and said, okay, for $1.2 million, we can lower your carbon footprint by 16% in 30 days. Well, do it. So we did it. Now, to be honest, every time you build a new building, you've increased it. And so you're continually going up and down in terms of the carbon footprint. But that was something that we were able to do. It was relatively easy. And then the other thing we did was we're involved with a couple of international organizations. One is called ICLEI, I-C-E-L-I. And ICLEI is an international sustainable governments organization. And so we've been able to participate on a global basis on communities that have developed sustainable programs. And the other thing that we did was we joined the International Carbon Disclosure Project. So every time we build something, we determine its footprint and we add it. And when we came up with our carbon footprint, they came back and said, it's so high, and you guys are adding the jet costs of people that come to visit you to your carbon footprint. You don't have to do that. Nobody else does it. And we went, but it's real. So we are going to add it. It is part of our deal. So basically, a few years ago, we decided, let's bring some folks from both Woods Hole and a national modeling group and come in and talk to us about what the potential is in terms of our snowfall. And those of you that have been around here a long time, I am sure you've noticed change. In my house that I've owned 25 years, when I moved there, you know, it was not uncommon for us to walk on the snow above the 6-foot fence lines to go to a party next door. We haven't done that in more than 15 years now. And so what we're noticing is we're wetter later and we're wetter earlier in the season. And when we do get storms, some of them tend to be more severe. So there was that whole movement a few years ago of changing global warming to climate change. Because depending on where you are, temperature might go down or it might go up. But the idea is that it's fluctuation. So basically, this is what we were told was going to happen to us. And it was based on core sampling going back about 30 years in our town on snow. So the biggest thing, one of the big things we do is we corrupt youth at a very, very young age. And we get them involved. And our high school has actually my leadership program. We are in year 26 of our Park City leadership. In our school, in our town, the city runs the leadership program. And one day of that leadership program is how to fight the government. I get to teach that, which is awesome. And basically, what we're trying to do is get the kids involved in it. This is your town, it's your future, so we want you to participate. So to a certain extent, we get them to do recycling programs in your kindergarten class and things like that, and start doing that. So this becomes part of your daily life. It becomes rote. So we did a big thing up at we have a trail called the 9,000-foot trail. We all went up to the 9,000-foot trail, which is an amazing bike path. And we did, these are aerials, that's an aerial shot of us. This is in the summer, obviously. But then last year we decided, you know, we need to do something about idling. Because it's just ridiculous. And we can understand cops idling, and we can understand that if it's below a certain temperature, that maybe you need to idle. But let's legislate this. Let's make this a law. And the state came in and said, we'll override you. There's been a reoccurring theme during my tenure in office, which is the state coming in and saying, don't do that or we'll override you. It happened with plastic bags and a couple other things. But basically, we looked at what is the amount, what do we do, how much gas do we waste a year idling? And that was the number. And so the state came in and said, you cannot make this a law. We don't enforce it, the residents do. They see somebody at the post office who leaves their car out front running, and they'll come out and someone will have reached in the window and turned the key off. Or they'll knock on the door and say, could you turn your car off while you're doing it? And so there's that carrot and stick thing. And about 8 years ago when we started the curbside recycling program, I thought, Dad, this is going to be great. Everybody has an opportunity. We're making it so easy. 35% of our community utilizes curbside recycling. So those are the type of things that even 5 or 6 years later, I was kind of in favor of. No, if you see someone's regular trash can overflowing with cardboard boxes and they have the ability to recycle for free, fine them and put that into an environmental fund. We're so much more into the carrot. So basically we haven't done that yet. But now we're trying to get people, come on, you have these things that are free to you. It's that easy to do it. That was cool. So this is City Hall. So basically we have a Depression era building that one of the things that we wanted to show was that you could take an historic structure and green it. And so this building has 120 panels on it, the ground source heat pumps. Basically the side we're looking at is the west facing. So the sun comes up on the east side, all of the lights in the building will dim and increase automatically based on the ambient light coming into the room. And if you don't move for 45 seconds, they go out. So sometimes when there's like a really tense moment in a council meeting, and then the lights all go out. It's like, okay, somebody's got to get up and dance for a minute so the motion detectors pick it up. But basically, what we wanted to do was set the example that one of government's job is to set the example of what it is you want to achieve. So this is an affordable housing project. 100% off of the natural gas grid, 60% PV, 100% solar hot water. Some of the families in this project have 0 power bills. And basically, what we used to do in our town was when someone came in to do affordable housing, the city would say, well, if you give us X amount of money, they're called fees in lieu, then you don't have to do the affordable housing. Well, we got rid of that. You've got to do it now. But we had about $3 million in the bank from these fee in lieu accounts that we had. So we decided, you know what? Let's be our own general contractor and let's design an affordable housing project. And basically looking at our housing inventory, the single biggest thing that we were low on, we had a lot of rental units. About 11% of all units in Park City are permanently deed restricted to maintain the affordable housing in our town. So what we needed was whole ownership affordable housing. So this project was built and these homes were between $160 and $210 in terms of their price. And if you didn't have the money for a down payment, there was an assistance program to get it. So here was 13 families that were able to buy homes in Park City that otherwise would not have been able to be there. It's an awesome project. As this got done, we had a guy that came into a council meeting and he said, you need to get something straight, bub. And I said, okay. And he said, I did not move here to mingle with the people who serve me. Yeah, good. I'm glad it doesn't go over well here either. And you've done nothing but socially engineer this town for over a decade, and I'm sick of it. And so what are you going to do about it? And I went, I'm not going to do anything. I think you should move to Vail. I actually did tell him that. But he said, this is a community for the idle, wealthy. And so this 40% that you talk about that has no health insurance, they have no right to be here. And I said, who serves you? Who teaches your children? Who answers the call when your house gets broken into? So he goes, that's not a good enough answer. And I said, okay, and so you don't think these two people on our city council who live in affordable housing, or someone like me who has 3 jobs to try to serve in government should be here? And my family's been around here for 50 years, and so, I'm sorry, but you can F off. So the next morning, mayor goes off in council meeting, and it was awesome. I don't know that I'd ever felt better being in political office than when I told this guy that 6 months later, his daughter applied for affordable housing. And when she came in, she's like, do you know who I am? And I went, yeah, usually it's like Robert Redford that says that, but yes, I know who you are. And we do not blame children for the sins of the parents here. So if you qualify, of course you can have it. But this has been a very big deal and a very big paradigm shift in our town, is respecting the socioeconomic diversity that we have that makes a resort function. And so, needless to say, this is part of the general plan outreach and the neighborhood community things. One of the things that we do is public hearings ad nauseum. Even on things that we are allowed to decide administratively, I was always adamant about, got to do a public hearing. Well, what if nobody shows up? Well, you didn't. You gave them the opportunity. I don't want to ever be accused of not giving people the opportunity to participate. Most of you who have been to council meetings, you typically have a work session and then you have a general session. And I don't know, when you guys have work sessions, do you allow public input in work session?
When I can push it.
Good, because we always do. It's not a public hearing, but it's like, if you took the time to show up, even though this is a work session and we're not deciding anything tonight, tell us what you think, and it's absolutely fine. So needless to say, we got people to participate in this. That visioning process, close to 500 people participated in it. And we never had even 75 participate in the 35 years before. And basically, here are the ideas. Put a sticker on what you like. It's very, very scientific. And it was, again, the Tao of Da. Let's ask people what they want and then actually try to accomplish it. Our public-private partnerships. Every one of these groups in our town have a huge presence. This group right here, the National Ability Center, started about 25 years ago for mentally and physically challenged people, to teach them how to ski, to teach them how to horseback ride, to get people out in the mountains. And about 6 years ago, converted to the Wounded Warrior Program. And just as a pull at your heartstrings story, 2 years ago, I went, and I've always gone and met the soldiers that are staying with us. And I met these 2 guys, and I said, if you would like, we would be honored to acknowledge your service if you feel comfortable coming to a meeting. And they went, no. Neither of us have even put on our uniforms since we left Afghanistan, because we can't. And they did come. And they got up and they said, we want to talk to you about your town, because we've been here for 3 weeks. And when we got here, we were under threat of divorce from our families because we came back different. Let me tell you what your town did for us, and what it was like to walk around wearing just khaki shorts and everyone in town going, thank you. Regardless of our position on the wars, they felt so thankful for what they got. And it was one of those epiphanies about, God, we need to take a step back at times and look at how fortunate we are. Because we get so caught up. I mean, we don't have forests like you do, but we still get caught with the forest through the trees. We still have those issues at times. That our issues become so big and we forget to step back and go, oh my God, look at how fortunate we are in terms of where we get to live. So there are partnerships between every single one of these nonprofits and the city. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. This group right here, Park City Education Fund, the only other state that is lower in terms of the amount of per pupil funding than Utah is Mississippi. We are horrible at it. So someone starts a nonprofit, raises $3 million a year, and funds high school programs and all school programs. Scholarships for teachers to get advanced educations and degrees. They get up and do it themselves. I've told a few of this, I kind of jokingly tell people that I have this permanent bruise right there for people going, you know what you should do? You know what you should do? And that I got really good at turning the finger around and going, no, how do I facilitate you doing it? Because we can't do everything. The government can't do everything, but I can certainly help you do it. So why don't you set up a group and start this? When I took office, we had 38 people on boards and commissions. We now have 280. And so there's so much opportunity. And things like our leadership class, there's about 25 to 30 in it each year. We have 180 applications we average every year and have for 26 years. So here's your, and one thing that you might want to do in your class is we take our local and county government, planning staffs, planning commission, and elected officials, and we put them on our bus. It's kind of our homage to Ken Kesey. If anybody understands that joke? You're too young. So anyway, and we put them on a bus and we invade another city. 2 cities a year, and for 2 days each day. What do you do about affordable housing? What do you do about this? And things that we find that are cool, we steal. So, for example, when we took the skateboard park, that was one of my issues before I was the mayor. And I got a speeding ticket on Main Street in Park City in 1968 on a skateboard. Arrested. There hadn't been a car on Main Street in 6 months. And yet, so anyway, so we organized kids and said, show up at every city council meeting. Bring your boards and sit there. Say, and in public input, get in a big line and talk about the skateboard park. And finally, one of the elected officials said, why would we do this for those type of children? This is before I was in. And I was like, I'm one of those type of children, and I still skate. And so, needless to say, it took 5 years for the rec board to decide whether or not to do a skateboard park. So when I got in, we fired them. This is a good idea, let's do this. And so we put in our skateboard park. 72 hours later, Tony Hawk and Shaun White showed up. Shaun White was a 9-year-old at the time. And now it's been expanded. And then we started getting, oh, we need to have guidance on these rec facilities. And I went, no, let the kids do it. It's one of the most amazing sociological experiments on earth is to watch a skateboard park that has no guidance. Because the kids have to watch each other. Because only one person can drop into that bowl at a time. So they're all working it out. And then we got the complaints about the tattered and pierced youth that were hanging out in the skateboard park. So we hired them as the instructors. And they're awesome, and they're great, and they're bought in. And here are people who would actually not necessarily be part of the process that got bought in because someone acknowledged that they make a difference and they're important, even though they might not fit what the typical criteria is. So one of the things that we do every few years is we do basically a check. How we doing? What do you guys think? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I promised I'd sashay.
Well, you keep going forward.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
He's a progressive. He keeps getting forward and forward.
So anyway, we went to them and said, okay, how are we doing? Judge us, rate us. Needless to say, relatively decent marks by the people who live on our town. And this has nothing to do with what's in the water system. And you'll see the lowest one is the ease of car travel. And about 10 years ago, the New York Times did a big story on Park City and Sundance and said, no Park City. And they did it as a derogatory comment, and we were like, yes, we love this. And so, and our biggest partner in terms of reducing traffic during Sundance is Sundance. So they started marketing the festival about, please take our Sundance shuttles from the airport, do not rent a car. Now, Hertz and Avis were a little pissed about this, but we said you do not need a car once you get into our town. So the only time you need to pay for something is when you take the shuttle from the airport to us. And then once you're here, the whole public transportation is free. And if you have some type of physical challenge, we'll send the bus to you for nothing. All you have to do is call us. Open and responsive government. But needless to say, relatively good numbers. So this was the gist of what boiled down in terms of the visioning process. And I must admit, I read the regional plan over the last 2 weeks, put down The Economist and Murder Mysteries, and read that plan. And it's one of the most awesome planning documents I think I've ever seen. The ability, the things that you guys have, you certainly have some things that you should be exceedingly proud of, aside from the lake, which that's unheralded. But the fact that all of these groups came together and came up with that document, it's absolutely amazing. But there's not a lot of ethereal philosophical commentary in that about who are we. And that was one of the things. I went on some of the websites of the various communities here, and it's like, what's the vision? And I've seen that you're doing great in terms of collaboration, but what's the vision that your community came up with? So what we did was, based on that community thing, those were the 4 things that people came back at. And then what we did was went back and said, we spent 2 years and said, okay, how do we budget this city for the outcome that the citizens wanted? Dow have done. And so basically those were the 4 big things, and then the outer circle was kind of more of a general statement. But there's things, I mean, when you have people that are thinking about what's the social equity of what we do here, and what's the environmental impact of this new project, you know, basically it puts us more and more onto the same page. We're talking about the same issues. So that gap, or the 4th wall, isn't there. And again, that goes to those 3 circles. So all these things are kind of intertwined. And then the last thing, in terms of that, is you go tell the freaking world what you've been doing and try to talk about it. So when I took office, I sat down with the chairman of the Republican and the Democratic Party. Are you nonpartisan here in your local elections? Yeah. And so are we. And I said, you know, I will not do any party functions as long as I'm in office. That's not my job, and I don't want anyone to ever think that I'm leaning. Well, they know how I lean, but I won't use the pulpit for those individual things. And by the way, that's my quote too. And so the Democratic Party called when Senator Obama was running for office, and they said, "Do you mind introducing him?" And I said, "He's a United States Senator. Of course I would do that, as long as you realize if John McCain comes tomorrow, I'm going to introduce him, and I'm going to ask Sarah Palin if she wants to go dancing." Because she dances actually pretty well. That's about the only thing I appreciate about her. But anyway, so I go to this function that's in a 28,000 square foot LEED certified house. If there was ever an oxymoron. Half of Forest in Virginia built this house, but by God, it's green. And I had some problems with that. And I'm standing there, and Senator Obama's walking up into the house, and the head of the party came and said, "You know what? You haven't really supported us enough, so would you mind leaving?" And I gave my best Rodney Dangerfield, and I was like,
"I've been thrown out of bigger rooms than this one." You know what I'm saying?
and I said, "Fine, I'll leave." "Oh, but stop and get something to eat on your way out." And so I'm in the kitchen, and Senator Obama walks into the kitchen, and he goes, "Aren't you Dana? Aren't you the mayor?" And I was like, "You are good." And he said, "One of the reasons I came here, I wanted to meet you." I was like, "Okay." And so the head of the party goes, "Sir, would you come with us, because the people in the next room spent $500 each to meet you. The mayor couldn't afford that." And Senator Obama says, "That was cold and exceedingly rude, so I'm going to walk out the back door with him." And he left with me. And he said, "I'll be back in 10 minutes. Then I'll stay 10 minutes extra, but I want to talk to him." And he goes, "And by the way, how's your band?" "What?" "We just listened to your new album coming up here, and it was great." So anyway, we walk outside, and he said, "I was sitting on the floor of the Senate last week, and I was with Bob Bennett and Orrin Hatch, who are 2 senators from Utah. And I told him I'm going the belly of the beast, I'm going to Utah." And he said, "Where are you going?" "Park City." "Oh, you need to go meet our friend." "Who's your friend?" "Well, he's the mayor of Park City." He goes, "Isn't Park City like this really liberal town?" "Oh yeah, we don't necessarily agree with him politically, but we love what's happened in Park City, and we're very proud of it." And so he said, "You know, I want to talk to you about activism, because I was an activist in Chicago." And I said, "I'm not trying to be rude, Bob, while you were still being breastfed in Kenya where you were born. I was getting arrested for anti-war activities in West LA. And so I come from that background too. But my job is different once I became a representative of the people." And so we talked about this, because he said, "I have to figure out how to make inroads, and it sounds like you have." And so just to kind of sum up before questions, it was one of the most amazing things in terms of being in office, was to have these guys that are such devout Republicans be supportive of our community. And the idea of changing our image, that no, we are part of Utah, we do respect where we live, we are going to be respectful of everybody else, but we're going to argue with you. And that's one of the things about our town. When I first ran, one of the 4 legs of my campaign, of the stool, was civility. And when we had our citizens group, we would put out bumper stickers that said, find your place, dig in, protect it. And another one, we stole it from Margaret Mead, was don't ever underestimate the power of a few people, because indeed they're the only ones who do ever change the world. And so I guess what I want to leave you on is something I never thought I would be in a position to be an elected official. And yet there was time, and there was something that made me step up and go, okay, it's time to do this. And actually, my first T-shirts, they were tie-dyed, they were awesome. And they had a big clock on it, and it said, it's time. And we got Olympians and everything. By the way, congrats to the local Olympians who medaled. That was awesome. But the idea that stepping up is worthwhile, and the difference you can make in terms of that is truly worthwhile. And I don't know that there is anything that I enjoyed more than public service. And people were like, gosh, you must have become so thick-skinned because of when people were angry and these letters to the editor. And it was like every letter to the editor against the government in 12 years, I called them. Want to have a cup of coffee or a beer? Or if someone was of a faith that didn't do that, you want to have a Jell-O cup or something like that. No disrespect. But basically, I made a point, well, you're not going to answer me in the paper? No, that's rude. I want to show you that, one, we care about what you think, and that we do think that that's our role. And so one other thing, and I saw it today because I was so impressed that Angela actually came to this. It's not law in our town, but we made a decision 10 years ago that every one of us has to have at least 7 liaison positions. So with the 6 officials, and then report every week on those 7 groups. So whether it's Friends of Trails or somebody else, come tell us what the groups are doing, and we have to go to the meetings. So I'm sorry. So it does keep us eyeball to eyeball with people in our town. One of the other things I did was I said, why can't we go have a drink after a council meeting? Oh, there's sunshine laws. Most of you know what sunshine laws are, but a group of elected officials over a quorum, it's illegal for them to get together because they can be deciding policy not in a public forum. And I said, fine, let's announce it. On every one of our council agendas, it says, the mayor and council may meet socially after the meeting for a cocktail. No city business will be conducted, and the public is welcome to join. And so, it's fun. So, the paper does this huge campaign against me and this idea. And the letter campaign in terms of, wait a minute, I can go have a beer with the people I put in office and talk to them at least once a week, guaranteed on every Thursday night. Why is this a bad thing? So it's been, needless to say, I have had so much fun serving. It's certainly worth it. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of things that you lose on, but the only thing that happens with losing on something is it makes you stronger. And so I encourage all of you to participate. I was so impressed with, one, what the leadership class here has done, 2, the amount of young faces that have been part of this. And that's one of the things I think is part of our jobs as elected officials, is to make sure that we hear what you're saying. So do not be afraid to participate, and thank you very much for having me.
We're almost done here, everybody. Thanks for spending all day Saturday with us. Hopefully this has been a great summit for you. We just have a few more things to do, a little closing statement, but also we want to do our scholarship presentation as well. And so when we started this, we really said, yeah, this is to elevate your view, to go ahead and try to get what we thought were our peers and our community members involved. But we also wanted to try and inspire the next generation of who we thought were leaders in the community. And we did have the chance through Leadership Lake Tahoe to tour both South Tahoe High and Littell High, and we were impressed by the students that we met there. So we said, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. And we, through some generous sponsorships and through the admission fees here, we were able to raise money for scholarships for each in the sum of $1,000 for a student from each school, which I think is just really And you know, we had some amazingly qualified applicants, but we were able to narrow it down to a winner from each school. So on behalf of the Leadership Lake Tahoe class of 2014, I'd like to congratulate Sarah Jobbins from South Tahoe High School and Jenny Shapak from Hotel High School. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, so we're at the end of our summit. This Leadership Lake Tahoe Summit. Oh, sorry. Oh,
my sister couldn't be here.
Speech.
we're at the end of our summit, but I do want to ask Jason Collins to come up. He did want to say a few words, and then I'll give my final little spiel.
Well, I've had the good fortune of being the Leadership Lake Tahoe Task Force Chair this year, and it's been a lot of fun working with this group, and I really appreciate everybody coming out for this summit. So I may steal a little bit of Matt's thunder here on closing things up, but I'll pass it back over to him. But first, I'd like to give recognition to somebody in this room that works tirelessly at elevating the view of our community. And she works on a daily basis to promote our future, and she's more passionate, more educated than anybody else, I think, in our community, and that's B. Gorman. So thanks, B, and thanks for, she's the president of the chamber, so we wouldn't be here without her, this class wouldn't be here without her. So I'm also on the chamber boards. I'd like to thank all the chamber board members that showed up, all the task force members that were here. We had a very, very small part in this. All we did was come up with the idea of, hey, why don't you put on a leadership summit? So that's all the credit we get. We don't really get much. But we definitely want to give credit to this amazing class. Up until this year, I said the leadership class of 2010 was by far the most stellar class ever, because it was my class. But this class is definitely going to pass us up. So what I'd like to do now is invite the entire Leadership Lake Tahoe class of 2014 up here. And you guys, so when we set forth on this project, we'd never done this before. We always had small group projects, and we wanted to have a project that we thought, even if it wasn't successful, the process would be a great leadership development project. And so I think along the way, there were probably times when they thought that was all they were going to get out of it. But they have really elevated the bar on what to expect out of future Leadership Lake Tahoe groups. So thank you so much for all your hard work, and Karina and Matt for leading the charge, but everybody worked so hard. Great job.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan Burke. I'm a part of Leadership Lake Tahoe, the organizing class for the Elevate Your View Summit. And I just have to say it was such a success, and it was wonderful to see the turnout and the engagement of the community. And this is something that we hope to continue for years to come, because we do feel like it's an integral part of leading this community in the right direction. So we appreciate everyone who attended, and we look forward to hopefully continuing this event in the future.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Bowen. I'm a longtime local here at Lake Tahoe, and this event at Mont Bleu, put together by the leadership team of young people looking at issues of the future. This was an outstanding conference. particularly since it invited somebody from the United States and somebody from Toronto, which gave us a nice feel for what's going on in locations like ours, number one, and number two, large urban areas as well, in this case Toronto.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this video is part of a playlist. If you click the annotation on your screen right now, you'll be taken to the other 2 videos in the playlist, which will help you see all of the videos in their proper context. Yes, I know it's a lot of content, but it is really worth it to watch it all the way through. So stay tuned to Fabulous Lake Tahoe, because there's a lot more coming up in the month of May and June. In the month of June, I'm going to be covering America's Most Beautiful Bike Ride like I do every year. I'm also going to be covering the Wagon Train Parade and several other events to be mentioned. There's going to be a June concert report. So subscribe to Fabulous Lake Tahoe to see all of those things as they happen. And thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in sharing this video or putting it on your blog, I want you to know that I am perfectly okay with any of my videos being used on anyone's blog or website. Just credit me. I am perfectly cool with it. So stay tuned to Fabulous Lake Tahoe. Thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. It really helps me out. Thank you, and keep Tahoe blue. Bye.